Thank you for tuning in. Today's show will be informative and educational. I initially discovered the word colorism in my early 20s. That was back in 2000. At that time, I was sitting in the guidance counselor's office. She was getting all of us ready for our new careers by offering career advice. Her words were clear to me. You will not have a hard time getting a job since you are light skinned. Have you ever wondered why we suffer colorism within the Black community? In a book that I'm reading, Our Kind of People, in back in 1492, in the 15th century, when African slaves came to New Jersey, what happened was they categorized us into two groups. And the two groups were field Negroes and house Negroes. And the field Negroes were the ones who did the laborious work outside of the house. And the home Negroes were the ones who did the less laborious work and worked inside the home. Now, you're probably wondering what this has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. This illustrates the impact of racism, classism, caste systems, and biases. My name is Rochelle Carrier, and I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion advocate. And for a living, I help thought provoking leaders implement DEI workshop plans in their workplace. And if you tune in, not only will you have better insight into our experiences, it will allow room for self reflection. In a previous episode, we shared how colorism affected us or helped us. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Dr. Jean-Luc Cadet. He's a chief molecular neuropsychiatrist in the research branch. He graduated from Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons in 1979. Dr. Cadet did his residency training in psychiatry at the Department of Psychiatry at Columbia University and in neurology at the Department of Neurology at Mount Sinai Medical Center. He came to NIH in 1992, where he is presently a tenured senior investigator and the chief of molecular neuropsychiatry research branch at the NIH. Dr. Cadet is a society for neuroscience and Society of Haitian Neuroscientists. He has co-authored more than 500 papers, book chapters, and abstracts on addiction. He is presently on the editorial boards of several important journals. In addition, he has reviewed scientific articles for many scientific journals. He has also received several awards related to science and diversity. Dr. Cadet, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction. Thank you for the nice invitation. I'm very happy to be here talking to you.
Likewise, the pleasure is all mine. Backstage, you actually mentioned something. We're going to jump right in. You actually said, colorism is a big problem in Haiti. Can you, enlighten us a little bit on how you feel that this is a problem in Haiti? And how does it affect the Haitians?
So I grew up in Haiti. I guess between 1950 in the 1950s and 1960s. So I went in before I came to the United States in 1970. I attended elementary school, secondary school in Haiti. So from the beginning, when I was growing up, there was obvious distinctions between people based on skin tone. So there was even to the point where some people were being called "ci blanc," which means little white people. The reason why that is because, as you mentioned in the introduction, there were descendants of French colonialists who had basically children with their enslaved African women. So this kept on going. Back in those days, the French would send their children, their mulatto, what we call mulatto children, to France for education. And they'd come back to Haiti and occupied high position in the hierarchy. That kept on going for a long period of time. And even after quote unquote so-called negritude revolution, this process was very prominent in Haiti. If as I was growing up, you could see that the highest functional people were mulattoes. But at the same time, that was the case that most of the people who had the better jobs were physicians, in some cases were mulattoes. There were also people who were saying that mulattoes tended to be not as smart as dark-skinned Haitians. So there was this battle between some people claiming that mulattoes, because they had French blood, were better suited to occupy position of power. For a long period of time in the history of Haiti, a lot of, especially after the Americans came to occupy Haiti, I guess that was in 1915, many different presidents and their officers or their people serving in their government tended to be mulattoes. With Duvalier, this actually helped Duvalier when he ran for president. And we all know about Papa Doc. He actually used that, saying that the vast majority of people in Haiti were Africans, dark-skinned Africans, yet all of the high function people in all the high positions were occupied by mulattoes. So he was able to use that over a long period of time to actually stay in power. So it really affected the country in many different ways. On the one side, on the one hand, you had mulattoes running the country for a long period of time, and then Duvalier used that to occupy the presidency and became a dictator. And but after he left, I think things went kind of back to where it was before, with most of the people who have the most money in Haiti right now being people of European descent, or have people who have European blood or genes.
Do you think that has further caused a divide?
Oh, I think there's no question that this cause has had caused and is causing major divides in Haiti right now. So you have these groups who are calling themselves gangs that claimed to be against the mulatto people in power, but so they we get into this back and forth fight, so that Haitians cannot really get themselves together, unite to make for better Haiti. And it's a very sad. When I was growing up and after I left Haiti, I was hoping that a lot of this colorism, this ethnic, that has actually led to some ethnic cleansing in Haiti would have disappeared by now, but it's still going on.
Do you think it's constantly perpetuated within politics and as well as you know social environments?
Yeah, that's actually an excellent question. In Haiti, a lot of people growing up want to go into, even if they started at not lower middle class, they try to use politics to enrich themselves. And so I think what some of the, if you really look at the history, what some politicians have done, people of darker skin tone like me, what they've done is ally themselves with the people in power who have the money, the business people, the people who run uh, export, import, and who tend to be more of European descent or and so what that does is that when the people in the darkest skin tone move into this positions of power, they also then behave like mulattoes and suppress the vast majority of the people. So some politicians, some demagogues have used this what I call abnormal setup to enrich themselves, to get into politics, and then again turn around and start misbehaving, if you, if I can use that word.
Right.
But I think a lot of this is also supported by other countries external to Haiti, the big European powers, the American powers, actually abuse this colorism in the same way that colorism is abused in the United States. So the European countries are experts at detecting those trends, and I think a lot of it uh, affect the politics in Haiti. But at the social cultural level, back in the 60s, I don't know whether this is still going on, but there were definitely a distinction between who somebody, for example, a dark skinned Haitian could date. So the mulattoes dated within their own quote unquote classes or skin tone people. So this was a terrible thing in the 60s because uh, there were stories about families uh, talking to their daughters about if you mix with dark skinned Haitians, your kids are going to get darker. So this is not a good thing that you want to get involved into. So those were, I don't know whether those things are still going on, but back in the 60s, there were no question that a lot of us would have discussion around this issue of mixing and to that so much so that people avoided interaction within social groups. So all of the dark skinned people would hang out together and the mulattoes would hang out together, which is very destructive as far as the Haitian community is concerned.
Correct. And it's absolutely destructive. I agree on all the points you're mentioning. However, I think what's even more destructive is that it happens within our homes,
Oh, yes.
right? And we had someone on the show a couple of weeks ago who said, they used to, he's of mixed background and he considers himself Black. However, his siblings who are lighter, and then one other sibling, I believe, is darker, they were lined up in front of the house from lighter skin to darker skin. And I think that also perpetuates the divide even among us as family members, and it causes a lot of resentment and insecurities, lack of confidence, and not feeling that you belong to a support system.
No, this is really that was very true in the 60s in Haiti. That when even though there was this prohibition between intermarriages, people would do it, right? But once this happens within families, okay, the skin tone definitely impacted what happened within the family. There were stories Not in my family so much because we're all about the same skin tone, but there were stories in my hometown where the younger people or the older ones with the darker skin tone basically became the servants of the lighter skin tone family members within the same family. So, and then the ones with the lighter skin tone were the ones that got sent to private schools, and not the ones with the darker skin tone. The people who were, so there was a story. I mean, one of my friends told me this when I was growing up, that if there were visitors to a family, okay, the people with the darkest skin tone were used to serve the people who were visiting the home. So that was pretty fascinating to me back when I was a kid. But in retrospect, this was really a very terrible thing to do to a child who's actually brothers and sisters of the other ones who are with lighter skin.
Right.
Laurie Thorpe's wrote a book, I guess that was in 2016, if I remember correctly, where she described a lot of the shenanigans that go on within families based on skin tone. And this was a that's I think this is still occurring in the United States, still occurring in Puerto Rico, right? Dominican Republic. Haitians who go visit the Dominican Republic face this shenanigans, and then this is happening in the Hispanic Latino community within the United States among Mexicans. Mexican of darker skin tone tend to be not make as much money as Mexicans with lighter skin tone in Brazil. So this is not just an American or Haitian phenomenon. It seemed to be a worldwide phenomenon, especially in the Americas.
Do you think that stems from colonialism?
Oh, there's no question in my mind about that. So uh, I don't know whether you've read the book Caste by Isabel Wilkinson. It's a really great book on the issue
I'm,
of, she didn't discuss too much about colorism in the book, but the caste system,
I'm
the
going to write
black
that down. The book is called Caste.
caste, CASTE.
Okay.
Um, the the American caste system within the Black community was created on the plantation slash labor camps where you had African enslaved Africans serving as beast of labors, basically, right? So you mentioned at the beginning, you mentioned house Negroes, right? The house Negroes, a lot of times, were children of the owners of these labor camps, right? So the light skinned black people serve in their house, and then they were not exposed to the harsh labor in on the plantations, right?
And I want to add something. They weren't
Mhm.
exposed to the harsh labor of the plantations, nor were they exposed to the sun.
That's correct. That is very true because they wanted to keep them light skinned, and over time, so even after uh, the Civil War, this process went on, right? So the white people created this system in the United States, in Haiti, in Brazil. And so even after slavery, the mentality lasted, right? So it was people learn this behavior, they learn the benefits of this behavior, and the behaviors continued, right? And I think the behaviors had neurological impact in the brains of those individuals, right? So that it was rewarding to be a light skinned person because of the benefit, financial benefits, the social, political benefits. And if you look at the history of some of the HBCU, historically black colleges and university, after the white presidents the positions were opened up of that the white no longer close to black people. The black people who became president of these universities or professors at these universities tended to be light-skinned black people. So, and then the sororities, the fraternities in those schools, right? The paper bag tests, okay? So in 1980s, I was living in Washington, D.C., and I met a few black people. Some of them had lighter skin tone than you do. Some of them were bad. Yeah. But one of the women who looked, when I first met her, I thought she was Italian until she told me she was, no, she was mixed black and actually Anglo. And then she said when she met, she was at Howard University. She was trying to join a sorority, and then she brought a young black woman, really dark skinned black woman, my complexion, to the sorority, thinking that they would both join the sorority. So somebody pulled her on the side and then said, "Why did you bring her here?" Right. So this is within a black school. And she said, "What?" I said, sorority. I mean, she's my friend. And says, "No, we don't think she would do well here." I mean, those are the type of stuff that colonialists are saying to people now, that you don't fit within this system in this job because of you a black American, not a white American. So it's definitely colonialism has a lot to do with this, and so our minds are still very colonized. Okay,
Right.
even though we're making a big effort trying to decolonize our
Right.
minds are colonized. So we fall into the same type of bad behavior, destructive behavior to ourselves and also to other black people.
Right. You mentioned, I have a few people who have chimed in here. Hi, Roy, and thank you so much for always tuning in. He says Haiti and the Dominican Republic, the entire island has had an issue with this, going back to French and Spanish colonization. Lisa Hurley, she says, "Hi, Lisa, and thank you for joining in." She says here, "I remember reading about negritude when I was studying French Caribbean literature."
Mhm.
Roy said, "That's incredible. First, I have heard that this was actually taught, heard it so many times in conversations between people." So he says, "Question, I can't get a clear answer from anyone. Why is a mixed person accepted as black when they say they are, but in my experience, not accepted as white, if they choose to identify that way? This is a cultural and identity dilemma for many people. If people are mixed, we are either black, brown, or passing for white, but never white. This points to colorism."
Actually, this is the last point is really interesting point. I mean, was that Roy who said that?
Roy Love, yes.
Okay, so why? What you need to recognize in the United States, it is like that, right? But if you go to Brazil, um, people who are mixed can, usually, if especially if in the different class, right, upper class, they actually identify as white. So it's really that phenomenon that you describe is more of a American, North American, United States phenomenon. It's not the case in Brazil. So much so that people, mixed race people from Brazil who identify as white, get a really big awakening when they go to Europe, right? So some Brazilian soccer players, for example, who identify as white in Brazil, when they go to Europe to play, say, especially in Spain, when they go to or in Italy, right? they get bananas peel thrown at them, and get called all kinds of nasty names. So it's a big awakening. Say, wait a minute, I thought I'm white. Why am I being treated like I'm black? But in the United States, if you are 50% black, I mean, you could say that you mix race, I'm 50% white, but that's a personal decision that you can make, right? But the general society is not going to identify you as white. They're going to identify you as black, right? So this stemmed from the early days, especially after the Civil War, when all these laws were passed to prevent black people, black Americans, of any kinds of a percentage of blood. So it's called the one drop rule, which is really idiotic. Then if you were to look for a job and then they found out that you had any enslaved Africans in your history, then you couldn't have get that job. So it doesn't really make sense that somebody whose gene, if you were to do a genetic analysis right now, I've done mine, and I never expected that I had 5% European. I thought I was going to be all Africans, right? So if you do genetic studies of people now, I will tell you, I'll bet $1 million with you that the vast majority of African Americans, right, are mixed heritage. They might have 10%, they might have 20% European genes, but because the back in the time of slavery, the owners of the plantation could have sexual relationship with anybody they wanted on those slave labor camps, right? So this idea that 1% rule, that's really social determinants of people's positions in life.
In
And
society.
in society, right?
Yeah.
So it's there's no biological really reason for it except for the colonialist view of life in order to keep control of the means of production and because of their greed.
Right. Earlier you mentioned, and I recently, to be clear, I'm not of mixed heritage. Both my parents are Haitian. And, there's always a sense of pride in who I am. And moving forward, I recently learned about the brown paper bag the brown paper bag test,
Right.
and you mentioned it earlier. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
So again, this is part of the colonialism. This started quite, I guess, decades or centuries ago, right? So especially with the fraternities. So um, they would they would compare, in the case of this young woman that I mentioned, they would compare her skin tone. As I mentioned, I thought she was Italian. So she really very light. I mean, you put a bag next to her, and then she's that complexion, so she would fit in, right? But if you took me and did the favorite black test, I really am too. My skin tone is way too dark to belong to any of these fraternities that had those kinds of rule and regulation. The other thing that you might also want to know is the pencil test, right? So
Pencil.
pencil, how straight is your hair, right? Is it straight like me? Okay, so there were things like that going on. So you're a light skinned black person with straight hair or good hair, right? So you've heard about that. I mean, the whole idea of African hair looking uh, not professional also stemmed from the colonialist approach to, okay, people who have really kinky hair. That's really bad hair. I mean, the bad hair thing I is also in Haiti, right? So in the 60s, there were, so you compare the hair of a brother to that of another brother, right? So some Africans, Haitians, I mean, we're all Africans in Haiti, basically. So some people had straighter hair, right? But that's called was called good hair. And then some young women, and vice versa, some young men would only date women that had those kinds of hair, right? Nice curly hair, but not kinky hair that was difficult to comb. So much so that in Haiti and in my family, this was the case. The women and then the young women in school. I went to all boys school, but the young women who were walking to school, their family would straighten their hair with hot iron, right? And then you would notice in some cases where the young people would have burns next to their scalp because of the hot iron they were using to straighten their hair to make their hair look much more European. So I thought that was just a Haitian phenomenon. And then when I came to the United States, I said, wow, everybody's straightening their hair. And back in the 70s, I loved afros. I loved it when a young black woman would have a nice afro. I had a big afro myself. And and I said, wow, why are people doing this to themselves just to look European? And Europeans don't want you around, and yet you're trying to be like them. That was a terrible thing that I recognize.
Right. I think also it perpetuates the fact that in a mind that's already so fragile, and in a mind where there our lack of representation,
Hmm.
goes beyond what's imaginable. Like, we do things to belong and to be integrated into the majority, right? So that we're more readily accepted, from like you said, from the hair, from the dress, the way the way we dress, even the way we speak.
Hmm.
I there was many times growing up, there was, oh, I don't how can you be Haitian, you speak so well, you know and I think it also stems, I truly believe it stems from the media, lack of representation of all the other accomplishments that we can have, as scientists, as attorneys, as astronauts. I was showing my daughter a YouTube video the other day of, I think his name is Guy. Um, he was a black astronaut who went to Spain, who went to space. I don't recall his name at the moment, but I had to dig to page 100 of Google to find him. Really, he didn't come up on the first page, so it's there's a sense of suppression. There's information that's being suppressed. I believe there's still a supremacy that doesn't want the information to come out. So, on TV, we're seen as criminals, we're seen as basketball players, baseball players, and that's it. Which is a real shame. You know, the oh, Rashida says something here. She says, my son was told by another black person recently that he was too black to have such curly hair. So it must be fake. She said he was 16 at the time.
Hmm. No, it happens. I mean, it's the colorism even though the white folks started it, right, with the house negroes and having sex with the enslaved Africans and having light skinned babies that they use in the house, uh, got integrated into the way that Black Americans, Haitians, American, Haitians in Haiti, Dominicans in Dominican Republic, wherever there was any kind of slavery going on with the people as the supremacists, the colonialists, you have this remnant of this behavior that we learned as Black folks that's rewarding, right? So Black folks cannot have hair a certain way. But if you go to Africa, right? Africans have been in Africa longer than anybody else, other people have been in the rest of the world genetically, right? So that means that the diversity within African community is much wider than the diversity in other places around the world. That means we can have people with blue eyes, people with because they are more what they call single nuclear polymorphism that account for hair color, hair texture. All these things were in Africa for longer. So you can have all this variation of skin tone plus different kind of hair and eyes colors and things like that. So African Americans, if we want to talk about United States for the time being, also have the same learned. They've learned this process of thinking. That's why it's so important to decolonize the minds of African Americans, also, and Haitian Americans and Haitians in Haiti, Dominicans. It's really terrible between Haiti and Dominican Republic because it's so terrible. This because of colorism. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so def, I'm, in the United States, the issue of hair texture, I thought it was only a Haitian phenomenon. Also, until the 1990s, 80s, 1980s, when I was living in DC, as I mentioned before, a young Black woman started to talk about my hair and other people's hair, and I said, "Oh wow, you talk about this also in the United States." But this was a young Black woman who was telling me about good hair, bad hair, and then after I met her, she told me about this, and then the other white Black woman who's looked Italian told me about the brown paper bag test, and she decided not to join the sorority because of that. But a lot of clubs in the United States, things like Jack and Jill Club, you've heard about them. It's really also skin tone based, right? And you cannot join these. Maybe it's different now, but back in the 80s and 90s, there was a real big problem in terms of who could join Jack and Jill.
Right. Well, you'll enjoy this book. It's called Inside America's Black Upper Class: Our Kind of People by Lawrence Otis Graham. And he did this is where he did all the research, and that's exactly it. So he talks about the Jack and Jill Club, the Boule, the Lynx, and
Hmm.
how people at that time it were, you know, considered more acceptable into this, the Jack and Jill Club if they were lighter. So Veronique, my sister, chimes in and she said it's so hurtful that there is still this division within our culture. The comments are made so naturally. It makes you question if those that make these judgments understand how they are perpetuating the problem.
I mean, that's a good question. We talk about colonized mind. And actually, Frantz Fanon, somebody mentioned la negritude earlier. Frantz Fanon talked about the African response to colonialism, right? So you can either join the colonialists or fight against them, right? Those who fought against the colonialists a lot of time ended up dead, right? So people learn that. So they say, okay, I will join the abuser, right?
That's
you've
called the Stockholm
yeah,
Syndrome, which is
exactly.
what we're going to talk about next month.
Oh, okay. So a lot of Black people actually everywhere in the world suffer from Stockholm syndrome. It's a point. It's at a point now that is subconscious that it's really become it's almost spontaneous. It comes out so spontaneously. So one has to really stop oneself, do some self-analysis to say, how come I'm behaving like this? How come I'm saying this thing? As a psychiatrist myself, I had to work really hard to decolonize my mind. So when I doing my psychiatry program, right, if you grow up in Haiti, no matter how much you're trying to fight the system, you're colonized. Your mind is colonized. And then I went into medical school with all white people, right? Further colonization. So my psychiatry residency was all of the theories that I learned in psychiatry residency were European based. So I
Mm.
had to try to undo all of that. And I'm still in the process of trying to undo everything, undo this stuff, that by learning more about Africa, learning more about myself, learning more about what happens in a lot of different countries in the world. But Frantz Fanon said what happens with the colonized person is that a lot of times they choose Father Europe and reject Mother Africa, right? So when you chose the power base in places like Martinique, Dominique, and Haiti, the power base was French Europeans. So the fathers of those mulattoes had the power, they're on the plantation. So if a Black person is working in that system, you say, wow, I better align myself with the person who has the power. And, it's Stockholm Syndrome. So
Absolutely.
that's
Absolutely.
part of the abuser.
Absolutely. I'm definitely having you on the next show. We unpacked a lot. It's amazing. There's according to the World Health Organization, colorism in India is
Hmm.
rampant, and darker skinned women face discrimination at work, school, and even in love. And according to the World Health Organization, half of all skincare products in India are lighteners.
Hmm.
So, who estimates it to be a $500 million industry
Wow.
in India alone? He said
Wow.
the shade cards, like paint swatches, so that users can track the lightening of their skin.
Oh my God.
There is an old acquaintance of mine that had a skincare line, and his father was a chemist, and they created the skincare line along with skin lightening creams, and 50% of their profits came from the skin lightening creams that were being sold in Africa. It hurts my heart.
Yes, it's a big issue in Africa and India. I don't know whether you and your audience are aware of these movies. I guess it was from the 80s, Mississippi Masala, and Denzel
What's the
Washington.
name? What's the name of it?
Mississippi Masala,
Okay.
and Denzel Washington is in it. It's about the relationship of Black Americans with Indians who came from India who live in, I guess they were living in Mississippi. And then there's this dark skinned Indian girl in that family. And then the older people were making statement like, you'll never find a husband because you're too dark. So
Mm.
it's definitely in India, and in the caste book that I mentioned before, Isabel Wilkinson really goes into depth of the issue of the caste system based on skin color in India. The sad one about is Africa. There's some very beautiful African men and women in Africa, but it looks like it's mostly women who are buying the skin products. I know in the United States it seems to be the case. I don't know whether it's the case in Africa or India, but those skin those are dangerous skin products, right? Because in order to impact your skin, this this is called could be causing all kind of genetic abnormality in your skin and lead to skin cancer. So there are a lot of good reasons why people shouldn't be doing that stuff with their skin, and these chemicals that are basically very toxic. I don't know how much of it gets into the bloodstream, and I'm always worried about people's brains, right? Because I'm a neurologist and psychiatrist. I mean, that stuff could be getting into people's brain and affect their learning and memory skills, the cognitive processes. So it's very disturbing.
It really is. On a personal note, have you suffered? Did you suffer from colorism outside of Haiti?
In Haiti, not really, because my quote unquote my family was Philomeo Baines, my grandfather, so we were pretty well situated. We went to all the right schools and stuff like that, and uh, the so it wasn't an issue for me in Haiti. Uh, After I came to the United States, I think my first summer, that was, I mean, I knew one Dominican man in Haiti. He was Afro growing up, and he was a dark skinned Dominican person. But when I moved to New York, the first summer I was working in East Harlem, which is also called Spanish Harlem. I don't know whether your audience knows about this. It's really a very interesting phenomenon in Harlem. So I was working there as getting paid by the city to take kids all around parks and stuff like that. But a Dominican man, young man about my age, didn't know that I spoke Spanish. And he was speaking to the others, Hispanic people, and calling me all kinds of names, right? So so that was my first experience. I said, "Wow, I'm working here. That was the first summer after the summer after my first year in college, and so I spoke to him, and everything was in English because the kids spoke English mostly, and some of them spoke Spanish. So I spoke to him in Spanish. But you could see the guy's face.
The blood must have drained from his body.
And so, but when I came to the States, I don't know whether this was the case with your family, but when I came to the States, my Spanish was much better than my English, right? So I mean, the first year I could speak Spanish to anyone, went to the bodegas, and so. But this person didn't know that, and there were other kids who there. I mean, I guess I was 18 at the time, and they were there, and he thought he could just speak to them and calling me the N word, things like that. And I told him I knew what he was saying. But so subsequently, when I was at Columbia, I was one of very few Black people at the medical school. So whatever I experienced was more racism
Mm.
on colorism. There were not enough. The other people were about my skin tone, and we kind of got together well. So it wasn't an issue. I think the first time was that at that with that in DC. I mean, colorism in DC back in the 70s, 80s, it was terrible. And I think during those years, I think there are occasions where I think a lot of what happened to me was related to being of that skin complexion because of people that you are interacting with, right?
Right.
And so I think a lot of it was mostly in the 80s and more. And then when I went back to Colombia was also racism, more read maybe you've read some of my posts, but all of my professional encounters have been with white people in position of power. So I've had to deal with racism a lot, but not colorism that much. I mean, it's an important issue for me because I'm trying to get people to decolonize their minds the way I'm trying to decolonize my mind. So I've had to learn a lot about what we do within our own culture.
culture and
Yeah,
race, right?
exactly.
Right.
So
You
it's
know,
destructive.
mm, of course. I believe that I fundamentally believe that colorism is also racist and falls under the category of racism because there's still an anti-black there.
Hmm.
There's still a connotation that you're not really black, you're light,
Right.
right?
But I agree. You're more white than you are black.
In another person's mind, absolutely. Actually, in another person's mind, and where I went to school in Montreal in high school, I remember, you know, um, mostly, yeah, they were Caribbean or African descent and being bullied. I was bullied for about 5 years
Wow.
throughout all of high school, hated upon. And I was called an Oreo cookie or zebra or uh, there was another name. I don't remember all the names right now, but everything to say that she's not really black.
Yeah,
She's not like us.
you're different. Yes.
That I'm different. So there was a constant being made felt like the other
Hmm.
and never really being accepted as a black woman.
Right.
In their eyes, I wasn't black. But Roy Love, interesting, he says it's called the Heights today. Spanish Harlem.
Oh, really? They call it the
Yeah,
high. They changed it.
yeah. He said it's called the Heights today, mostly Dominicans.
Wow. So I haven't been, obviously, I've been in Baltimore since 92, so things change. That's interesting. But even back then, when in the 70s, there were some Dominicans filtering in, and the bodegas were mostly owned by Dominicans. And then they were, where I was, there were more Puerto Ricans than Dominicans, but it was quite obvious that the Dominicans were planning to take over. So I'm not surprised.
Right.
The Heights. Okay. Thank you
Yeah.
for Roy.
He says and Roy, he says he's been tuning in a lot lately in the show. Thank you so much, Roy. He says, I agree with you, Rochelle. It is racism, bias against the mixed races and what others perceive.
Hmm.
Do you think, Dr. Kade, that it increases the likelihood of being hired? How was your hiring process?
If you, for
When
me,
Yeah, for
in
you,
terms
when you
of,
were done with med school and residency, how was the process for you? And do you think, you know, that st at that time, the likelihood of being hired, unless you had your own practice, was more difficult for you?
uh, from the perspective of being one of the very, very few people who had my kind of training,
Right.
uh, there were some specific places because of my colonized mind that I thought I should go to. Okay.
Mm,
So I think I picked places that were more difficult to get into anyway. Okay. And some of the places I didn't get into, it was really my choice in terms of what I decided that was going to make me look great. So I thought that when, as I was going through my career, that if I was at Columbia, which was true from the perspective of white folks, right, so that I would be more acceptable if I had gone to an Ivy League medical school, right? There are a lot of black people dealing with this issue right now. Say, why is it that we need to be validated by institutions like Harvard, Columbia, Yale, Stanford? Why is it that we feel that way? It's because of our colonized minds. So I picked these places to go to where, in essence, I wasn't really wanted. Yeah, okay. So because if black folks were wanted in those places, there will be more of us, right? It really
mhm.
doesn't matter how smart a black person is. Once you get into these places, they make it really difficult for you. So I can say that they've made my life more difficult than it needs to be. And you
Mm.
have to be honest with yourself that I have to be honest and say, I put myself in those positions. The question is, why did I put myself? Why do other Black people put themselves in those situations in places where you're not really wanted? Right. So then once you're there, and I've been basically quite successful by any stretch of the imagination in terms of what I wanted to do. But the stress level that I put myself through, that these other people put me through, was never necessary. Okay. And I think it was because of racism. I mean, I think the colorism thing is anti-Black racism within the Black community, but in terms of interaction with white folks in America, I think it's sheer white supremacy, being afraid of Black folks who are smart. They just don't like it, and they want to perpetuate the idea that the classification, the non-scientific classification of of races, with white folk on top, Black folks at the bottom, they want to perpetuate this myth. It's total mythical. Somebody created this in the 1700s, and there's no basis in science for this classification. And then we got taught about this in because of colonialism, plantation living, and then we believe it, and
Absolutely.
we're still behaving according to these myths.
And the reason why we're behaving according to these myths is because we still have a colonized mind.
That's correct.
Absolutely. How do you think we should eliminate it?
I think people need to do what I did. I mean, this is very selfish and narcissistic to say this, but what I did was, once I started to recognize this is really, why am I thinking this way? You need to acquire knowledge. You need to learn about Africa, right? You need to learn about the kingdoms that existed before the Europeans came and started to steal Africans to bring here or bring to Europe, right? Because that they were doing that, they were bringing people up to Europe too, not just over here, right? So you need to learn more about this, right? You need to learn that there were great mathematicians who were Africans, right? You need to learn all of the discoveries that Black Americans have made while under the yoke of slavery. All these discoveries, all these inventions were stolen by white men. I would say white men because they're the ones who were the owners, and put their names on them and made fortune based on Black people invention. And we don't know who these people are, but there's information now that people can access. We need to read books like 1619.
Yes,
Yeah,
Project 1619.
yeah,
I'm writing
you
it
have
down
to
right
read that.
now.
Yeah, you have to read that book. I got a signed copy because I pre-ordered. I think every single Black person in the United States should read that book. And I've also told the members of the Society of Haitian Neuroscientists that I think every Haitian person living in the United States should read the 1619 Project. Because a lot of us come from the West Indies, we have these ideas about what it is, what's going on with Black Americans, but we don't understand the story, right? I know that those stories now because I've read these books, I've done the searches, and we need to read the book Caste in order
Yes.
to explain the caste system within the Black community. If we don't understand the caste system and how that perpetuate our subjugation by white people, right? So we're helping the colonizers by fighting among ourselves on skin tone, and skin tone doesn't make you smarter than the next guy. And I would say I'm dark, and I know what my IQ is. I'm telling you, there are very few people, white or Black, who have this kind of IQ. It's not skin tone. I'm not a white person, so it's not. IQs doesn't really correlate
Didn't
with skin tone. It's just a fallacy that white people created to make black people feel bad.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's Rashida also here. She states, I challenge the idea of Black people being racist against one another when it comes to colorism. Black people have been taught and conditioned to believe this colonizer mentality. I believe wholeheartedly that we are prejudiced against one another, but racism is a power control construct, and Black people have no actual power to control in the US. Our decisions are truly about survival in a society that doesn't want us to excel.
Well, but the thing about it is within the black community, there are power structures. That's why it's so important to read the book Caste. Okay. I think there's this confusion. We cannot be racist against white people. I agree with that completely.
Right,
We
right.
can be anti-black racist against other black people because there are power structures based on skin tone. And in some cases, if you read the book, Isabel Wilkerson, she's totally brilliant, and I'm ready to give her the uh, book of the decade for nonfiction.
Mm,
The way she uses data to explain a lot of phenomena that people react to when we don't need, if we know the facts, then we start analyzing the issues very differently. I used to believe that also that there couldn't be anti-black racism within the community, but as you study it, it really there are power structures. So the idea, Rashida, is that you're saying that there are no power structures within the black community. That's not true. There are power structures in the black community where people are relegated to the bottom of wells, and the people on top, black people, want to keep him there also. So it's we have to be honest and say that we have to change those within the black community also in order to be able to face our real enemy, which is white colonialism.
right. And it's funny you said you you suggest or highly recommend that Haitians also read these books that you mentioned, Project 1619, The Cast, and Mississippi Masala. Mississippi Masala is
It's a
a mo-
movie.
is a movie, right? And we had a funeral this past Saturday. My great aunt passed away. She was well into her 90s. And I have to say we have some trailblazers and some great conversation starters in our Haitian household. And someone brought up colorism, and tout moun pe. Everybody was quiet.
Because they know
Yeah.
it's true, right?
Everybody was quiet. They didn't want to discuss it.
They avoid it. Haitians don't like discussing this stuff. And then
Nope.
when I bring it up with Haitians, they also give me the same response. They don't want to talk about it.
Nope.
If we don't talk about something, it's not gonna go. You're not gonna fix it. Like
Absolutely.
as a physician, I always like to compare this to an abscess, right? Or
Mm,
a tumor. People have tumors in their breast, right? And they go into this denial. Okay, when I was a medical student at Columbia University, these women would come with these big lesions in their
mm,
breast. Okay. And I say, wow, how long have you had this? He said, Doc, I was a medical student, but they called me doctor. He said, wow, I just saw it 2 days ago. This thing's been in their breast. This cancer's been there for a while, right? But they just saw it. Uh, there's no question. I mean, there's some fibrotic lesion, there's fibrosis. It's healing and unhealing. So it's been there, but you want to deny that. Or an abscess. People have abscess in their legs, right? Especially people who have diabetes. They might have abscesses that are not healing, and they come to the emergency room with fever. They say, "Wow, when did you notice this? Yesterday." It's not. It wasn't there yesterday. So you have
yeah.
to be able to okay, I have this abscess. I have this tumor. I'm gonna go to a doctor. I'm gonna get it examined. I'm gonna get it to be surgerized, right? Get rid of it. I'm gonna get the abscess lensed. But if you don't talk about the abscess, the Haitians are really good about denial. in denying stuff.
Right? I
Yeah.
believe 100%.
And then if you don't want, if you want to live with the abscess, you're going to end up with blood septicemia, and you're going to have uh, infection in your lungs and in your brain, and you're going to die. So you have to talk about the abscess and get a doctor to cut it out for you so that you can live a better life.
Absolutely. Roy says black and white Dominicans do the same thing.
Yeah, no, the Dominicans, it was amazing to me when I was living in the, I mean, I'll just give you one story, Roy, about that one Dominican person, but there are other stories about Dominicans in New York. They were pretty amazing to me. Some of them were really darker skinned than I am. And then talk to them and say, no, no, no soy negro. I say, you're not black. Where do you think your skin tone come from? From Europe? And they'd get really mad at me. But they were actually in New York. The Dominicans were the biggest colorists ever.
Yes. I think that stems from the history. However, we have to go back to our history books. There's such an erasure
Hmm.
that's being done in all our history books. And it's part of, again, suppressing what they believe to be the subservient race, right?
But
It's
I want to differ with you. I don't think white people actually believe that we are inferior to them. They set up the mythical
system.
representation of us as inferior so that they could, because of greed, benefit from our behavior, right? If you think that a group of people are inferior, you don't have to put out laws and have guns and doing all this stuff to try to repress them. So there's this fear of black excellence, right? So people are aware of the excellence. So the way to stop it is to terrorize. You terrorize those people that you're afraid of, that are who are going to take over. I mean, this sounds really black narcissism, but it is. I really believe this, that there's a, when you look at the history of Africa before Europe, Europeans decided to use gun cells in their empires to destroy Africa, you recognize the African civilization are much more superior. So, okay, so they know that they basically destroy Egyptian mummies because they knew they were Africans, real Africans. I mean, so if you know all of this story and then you have to erase it, try with violence and terrorism, you don't really believe that you're the superior uh, quote unquote pseudo race.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Roy again says here, by the way, I'm Dominican with Spanish, African, Italian, Native Caribbean, and Jewish ancestors. My mom is part Haitian and she never talks about her Haitian family.
No, they won't. Yep, they won't. They don't want to mention it. Yeah.
Mm,
I mean,
he
when I
said
have to admit
they'll
with
tell
me,
you they are Indian.
yeah, exactly. What's it? In Puerto Rico, they do the same thing. All the black people over
Mhm.
there. I forgot the indigenous group that they claim that they belong to. But looking
Mhm.
at these people, I say they're Africans, but
Yeah.
they tell you they're Indios.
Taino. Taino.
Indios, kind of, yeah, yeah, that's it. Yeah,
Mhm.
and this is wow. It's sad for our people.
Absolutely. It really is. It really is. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have these courageous conversations. And you know what makes me so proud today is that you, as a Haitian man, are decolonizing or is decolonizing your mind. And it's such a deep process and it's an introspective process to go through and so heartfelt. So
It's not,
heartfelt.
it's not easy.
I know. Oh, I know.
Mm. Mm.
And what's interesting is that these conversations here on the platform is what helps, because we have to be authentic.
Mhm.
Yeah, we have to be authentic. So my keynote is that while I tried to limit my own bias as much as possible by interviewing only men and women, I did not only stick to the same set of questions for ongoing interviews. It's impossible to remove my own personal experience from this discussion altogether. Ooh. Without it, I would not have been able to undertake it in the first place. The continual theme surfaced that if true equality in and out of the workplace is what we are after, we will have to tackle the issues that are distinctive to us. We need to recognize that we are not alone. I know many of you are having these transparent and courageous dialogues with the people around you and trying to figure out how you feel about all of this. It would help to ponder that change starts with us. How you resolve these questions will be distinctive to you as men and women of color and of diverse backgrounds. This will reflect your personal and professional experiences throughout your community and your workspace. Therefore, what's essential is that you do answer those questions. What's crucial is that you go through the process. And while enough of us do just that, over time, we will continue to have a united front. Transparency and authenticity is key. We need to be true to ourselves. We can fundamentally create that transformation, take your drawbacks, and turn them around into something others can find valuable. Give yourself some grace and the space. We must keep having these courageous conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Where these dialogues will take us, we don't know. At least we're here to share and help. It was such a blessing, Dr. Kader. Really, this conversation is going to definitely be continued. Your presence was such an honor. The conversation is definitely a conversation we need to continue. We need to continue having.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I really enjoy talking to you. I actually really enjoy Roy's into. It's a good thing that he's there talking about all of this. Also, thank you.
Well, he just said right here, I would love to connect with Jean on LinkedIn if he's amenable.
Yes, for sure, for sure.
So what I'll do, I'll connect you guys on LinkedIn,
That would be great. Thank you.
so you can continue having these beautiful conversations. Follow me on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. The links will be posted. Share your comments and feedback, your Q&As. We cannot wait to hear from you. This has been another epic moment, and there is more to come. Thank you again so much.
Thank you. Bye.